Mary was 6 when she first noticed the noises in the house. It all began like most childish things do, with fear. Laying in bed, she heard them in the walls and thought they were monsters. She would shrink underneath the covers and shudder at the scratching sounds that came from the wall and the ceiling of the old country house they lived in. Many nights, she would feel like she must surely shudder to death under her comforter. Mary would finally fall asleep with the sounds of scratching in her ears, and even then, she wasn't safe. She would have the worst dreams imaginable, dreams of monsters in the walls, with long claws and scabrous hands that drug their nails behind the walls. They were only looking for weak spots so they could come through and get her. Every morning when she woke up, Mary would say a little prayer and thank God for keeping her safe for another night. She would suffer like this for a whole month before finally meeting her monsters face to face and sleeping better the next night for it. Her dad had heard them too, it seemed. Mary found him in the laundry room one morning as she went to get a shirt for school, putting a glob of peanut butter inside a round plate. She sat and watched him for a moment, trying to figure out what he was doing, and when he looked back and found her lurking, he jumped a little in surprise. "Mornin', Squirt. You scared me half to death." "Mornin', Daddy. What are you doing?" He ruffled her hair and walked her out of the laundry room. "I'll show you when you get home from school." They should have noticed it by then. Mary went off to school, full of curiosity and wonder, and when she came home that afternoon, she went straight to the laundry room to check. The box was still there, and Mary heard something thrashing around inside. She was scared as she approached it, certain that the monsters from her nightmares would be inside and waiting for her to get close. As she peeked through one of the round holes in the box, Mary saw that it was nothing but a pair of fat brown rats. They became even more frantic when they saw her peeking. They started running and squealing around the little box, and as Mary watched them, she realized that they were just as scared as she had been. Mary didn't think about what she was doing when she opened the side of the box and let them scamper out. They didn't leave right away. They seemed to be trying to figure out whether Mary was tricking them or not. Eventually, their survival tendencies took over, and they left the box and ran behind the washing machine. Mary closed the box so that no other rats would scamper in, and went to the living room to watch cartoons. She was 2 hours into her afternoon cartoons when Dad came home and went straight to the trap. She heard him in there, grumbling confusedly as he looked at the sprung trap with no mice inside. In the end, her dad figured he'd been outsmarted and reset the box with more bait. Freeing his prisoners became an afternoon habit of Mary's. She would come home, make a snack, go see if any mice or rats were in the trap. They usually were. Some of them even looked like the same mice she'd seen from the day before. Every day she would turn them loose and watch them scamper off before closing the box and going to watch cartoons. She had stopped being afraid of the scampering she heard in the night, after learning that it was just the mice that she had been freeing. They were running and playing as though to thank her for helping them, and Mary went to sleep dreaming of happy mice playing hide-and-seek in the walls of the house. The week before Christmas, though, Daddy caught the magic mouse. That was also the day he caught her. She was out of school until after New Year's, and had gone from half a day of cartoons to a full day of cartoons. Both her brothers were out of the house, and Dad was out back chopping wood, when Mary heard a loud clang from the laundry room, and an ear-splitting squeal that cut through the sound of Huckleberry Hound like a knife through flesh. She jumped up from the couch and ran to the laundry room, wanting to see the big rat that Daddy had trapped. In that, she was not disappointed. The rat was huge, big as a kitten, and covered in long white fur that made its red eyes look fierce as they bulged from its head. Mary was hesitant to let this one go. Given its size and fierce demeanor, it looked like it might be mean. But as she watched him through the holes in the trap, he did the last thing that Mary would have ever expected him to do. He talked. "Excuse me, child. Do you think you could let me out?" Mary started. Rats weren't supposed to talk. Not to people, at least. She couldn't do anything but stare at him as he stood on his back paws and used his front ones to rub at his nose and whiskers. When he didn't immediately speak again, Mary assumed that she had imagined it, letting her imagination run wild again. She started to stand up, ready to go back to her cartoons, when the rat spoke again. "Please, child, I'll do anything if you'll let me go." He had talked. Mary went down and peered at him again. He was still sitting there, front paws cleaning his face in a furtive little scamper. But his eyes were locked on Mary's. She knew that she hadn't imagined it this time. Her hands inched towards the lock, but stopped as they came in contact with the mechanism that would open the side. Mary looked at the rat distrustfully, and it stared back at her as she asked her burning question. You won't bite me, will you?" It laughed, and its laughter was high and strange. "No, no, my dear, I wouldn't dream of it. If you release me, I'll owe you a favor." That was all the reassurance Mary needed. She opened the side of the trap, and the rat scuttled off on its clicky little paws. He stopped to look at her as he twitched his nose, seeming to smile as the two stared at each other. He was a very old rat, and his fur was long and white, like an old man's beard. He was missing a finger on his left paw, and his tail looked as though someone had chewed the end of it off. He rubbed his paws over his snout again in that strange way of his, and Mary thought he would surely speak again. In her wonder, she hadn't heard her father coming inside. "So you're the one who's been screwing up my trap," he said, and when she turned to look at him, Mary could tell that she had made a mistake. He loomed in the doorway, snow sliding off his thick jacket to puddle on the floor, and as the mouse ran for the hills, her father clamped a hand around Mary's arm and dragged her into the living room. When he was done, Mary didn't think she'd be able to sit down for a week, and when he told her mother, she found herself grounded from TV for the rest of winter break. Mary sulked as she sat in bed that night, her backside hurting almost as much as her ego. Her brothers had been no help when they'd come home. They'd only said that she shouldn't have been so stupid as to let Dad's rats out of the cage. "They're not supposed to be inside, you dummy. Dad's trying to get rid of them." This information hadn't helped, since Mary didn't want Dad to get rid of them. As they scampered through her ceiling that night, she thought about that sound disappearing forever, and felt a fresh wave of tears. "Why are you crying, child?" Mary stifled a scream as she turned to see the old rat standing on her nightstand. His white fur stood out like a searchlight in the dark room, and Mary couldn't believe she hadn't seen him before. He was up on his hind legs, staring at her over his front paws, and he looked like a servant waiting for instructions. Dad's trying to get rid of you and your friends, and I don't want you to leave." "Nor do we, child. It's cold outside. Without shelter, my kind will die. I wish they'd leave you guys alone. I wish they'd just go away and not bother you guys anymore." They were childish words that Mary would come to regret. "My children and I owe you a great debt, young lady. Let me think of this and see if I might not be able to answer your wish." You could make my family disappear?" she asked, not daring to believe it. It would be just like the movies she'd seen with Mom and Dad a couple of nights ago, where the boy's family disappeared and he fought the burglars. This time, though, it would be for real, and not because they accidentally left without her. Mary could do whatever she wanted once they were gone, and no one would be around to stop her. It would be a Christmas dream come true, and Mary stared at the old rat with anticipation. The old rat seemed to contemplate before saying, "We shall see. Give me a few days to think it over, and I'll speak to you again." Mary fell asleep to the sound of his heavy paws leaving up the hallway. The next few days were full of excitement. Dad didn't catch anything in the trap. He'd put a lock on it to keep people out, and he seemed very upset about it. He'd started hearing them in the walls, making him very angry that he couldn't catch them. Mom seemed to be trying to take his mind off it, taking them out to see the lights, or to Christmas events in town, or just off spending time together as a family. All the while, Mary thought about her secret, and her secret friends in the walls. In her mind, she would never miss her family once they were gone. She would never want them back, and if she did, her new rat friend could bring them back and make it all better again. Children can sometimes fail to realize the harsh realities of loss. She awoke 2 days before Christmas to find the rat on her nightstand again. "Excellent news, child! We have found a way to make your family go away." She started awake when his squeaky little voice cut through the night. She had been nearly asleep and rolled over to look at him when she heard his squeaky voice. His red eyes were fixed on her with an odd intensity, and in his hand was a little bag made of plastic, wound shut with a bread tie. He held it out to her with some reverence, and when she took it, Mary saw that it was full of powder. "Your mother has laid out the start of breakfast in the morning. What you must do is sneak downstairs and put this magic powder in the box she uses to make the cakes. Then, when they eat the powder, they will go away, and you will have your wish." Mary looked at the little bag. It was no bigger than a Barbie purse, and the powder inside made a dry, crunchy sound when she pressed it. The magic rat must have made the spell powder, she guessed. So Mary adding it must be part of the spell. She got out of bed and tiptoed down the hall, the old rat scampering behind her. She took the stairs very slowly so they wouldn't creak, skipping the third step on the landing as she jumped softly over it. The downstairs was very dark, the living room furniture looking squashy and spooky in the dim light. Mary glanced around nervously as she tiptoed, expecting Dad to lunge out and grab her any minute. As her bare feet touched the linoleum, she knew she was home free. The box of pancake mix was just where the rat had said it would be. Her mother had left it out, along with biscuit mix, her mixing bowl, and a whisk. Mary opened the box of pancake mix and poured the magic powder like the rat had told her to. When the baggie was empty, she closed it back and turned to see the rat perched on the table as though he had been observing her. "Now, be certain that you don't eat anything at breakfast tomorrow. Otherwise, you'll disappear too," he warned. Mary made a mental note to sleep in tomorrow so she wouldn't be tempted by any of the yummy smells, and slipped back into bed with a smile on her face. Mary knew that tomorrow her Christmas wish would come true. The smells of pancakes and bacon awoke Mary early the next morning. Her stomach growled as she smelled them cooking, but she rolled up in her blankets and tried to ignore it. She could hear her brothers getting up, running downstairs, jockeying to be the first to taste the bacon. She heard the smack and the ow as her mother smacked someone on the hand with a spatula and told them to go set the table. Mary smelled eggs, too, as her mother cracked them into the pan, and now her dad was lumbering out of bed and moving towards the stairs. Her mother told him to help set the table, and he called her name up the stairs before going to help her brother. A few minutes later, her dad knocked on the door and told Mary breakfast was ready. When she didn't stir, he did it again, and when she still didn't move, he just walked downstairs to join the rest of the table. "Oh well," she heard him grumble, "more for me." Mary hunkered under the covers. The moment she was waiting for had approached. They said grace, a low murmur as they all bowed their heads, and then the sounds of clinking forks and rattling plates began. Mary heard her brother talking about sledding today, Dad talking about finally finishing that surprise for someone in the barn, and Mom talking about some last-minute wrapping she needed to do. Her mother was just saying that she'd have to kick us all out of the house so she could finish, when she suddenly coughed in a wet, frightening way. Her dad asked if she was okay, but when she tried to say she was fine, one of her brothers started moaning, and Mary heard someone being sick all over the table. She was silent in her blanket cocoon, all the excitement lost. Was this what happened when people disappeared? Was this what disappearing people sounded like? She heard someone else being sick, and a chair crashing over as they fell. She thought it might be her dad, and when someone started screaming, she shuddered deeper into her blanket cocoon. There was the sound of breaking plates, someone falling to the floor and sobbing as someone was sick again and again. Her mother suggested that someone call an ambulance, but it was hard to make out as she vomited loudly. Mary heard Dad bellowing and thumping around, trying to get up from the table, before he fell hard to the floor and shook the whole house. Mary pulled her knees to her chest and waited for the sounds to be over, but they went on for much too long. The sounds of vomiting, crying, falling, breaking things, and the watery screams of her family took a long time to be replaced by silence. And in many ways, the silence was worse. The sounds didn't stop suddenly either. They tapered off, little by little, and when the last of the crying and dragging had stopped, Mary almost couldn't bring herself to move. Magic wasn't supposed to sound like that. In all the stories, magic just poofed people away. It didn't do whatever that was. She wanted to stay in her room forever, just crying and shaking. But as noon crept closer, her stomach began to growl, and Mary had to get up and use the toilet before her bladder burst. As she stood in the doorway to the bathroom, Mary felt her eyes straying to the head of the stairs. It was so quiet down there, much quieter than it had been earlier, and Mary wanted to know what was down there. She edged towards the stairs, feet feeling heavy, before peeking down the stairs. A sneaker-clad foot was just visible near the bottom. Mary wanted to go back to her room and crawl back under the covers, but she knew that she had to see what had happened. Mary knew that they hadn't disappeared like in a fairy story, and now she had to face whatever it was that had happened to them. The sneaker-clad foot belonged to one of her brothers, and after seeing him, she wished that she'd just gone back upstairs. Her brother was lying face down in a pool of blood in his own sick. He was reaching for something under the table, and as she looked, Mary realized that he was reaching for her mother's hand. Her hand stood out on the floor like a pale starfish, but unlike her brother, her back was against the floor, her face a terrible mask. Her mouth hung open, blood trickling from the corners, and her eyes were rimmed red with tears that stared into oblivion. When she'd fallen, she had taken most of the dishes on her side of the table with her, and her arms were covered in oozy cuts as she clutched the tablecloth in one stiff hand. Her other brother lay across the table, his blood staining the food with a dull, rusty red. Her dad had died on the way to the kitchen, his handprint against the linoleum, grisly. They were gone. They had gone away. Just as Mary had wanted. As she curled herself into a ball and sobbed against her knees, the perpetrator of these goings-on appeared beside her. "Now, why are you crying?" he asked, almost haughtily. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Mary looked at him, and he must have seen something on her face, because he scampered back a few steps, just out of arm's reach. "I just wanted them to go away. I didn't want you to kill them." "Kill them? Kill them like they killed my children for generations. You don't think this is the first appearance of the trap, do you? Your grandfather taught your father well, and he caught many of us in that trap. Then he would toss us, trap and all, into the river to drown. I've seen countless of my kind go into the river and never come back out again. They went away, and now so have your parents." He got close again, seeing she was in no mood to snatch him, and delivered the final blow. "And I didn't kill them, my girl. You did." He had misjudged her, though. Mary was indeed in a snatching mood. The rat's eyes bugged out of his skull as she squeezed him, red spittle running from the corners of his mouth as she squeezed him to death. He bit down on her hand, screaming as he died, but Mary didn't stop until she heard his bones break. She held his limp form as she shook it, and as she lay with her family on the bloody floor, her eyes ran thick with tears. That's where they found her when the police broke down the door, lying amidst the bodies of her family, her Christmas gift-giver still clutched in her hand. I pushed the sign into the ground and looked at the kids gathering up the street with thinly veiled satisfaction. "Keep off the dirt," it read. I'd seen the way their eyes gleamed when the truck came to deliver it, deciding on a preemptive strike. A tall pile of fill dirt was irresistible for small children, and I needed as much of the dirt for my project as possible. Having it scattered all over the yard would make that very difficult, and I needed to post signs before the neighborhood rowdies got any ideas. I went back inside then, not wanting to field questions about my dirt. Sitting in my easy chair, pretending to watch TV, I could see them gathering around to look at the sign. They hunkered over their handlebars and looked dubiously at the sign I had stuck in the mountain of dirt in the front yard. The sign was pretty straightforward, but I wouldn't put it past these kids to find a loophole. They knew me as the cool neighbor, the single guy who gave out full-size candy bars on Halloween and sometimes played baseball in the street with them. The guy who drank on his front porch and sometimes let them fish in his canal, if it was okay with their parents, that was. On some things, however, they knew that I was unbending, and it wouldn't do to argue with me. They all looked up when I came out on the front porch and leaned against the rail to look at them. If you're hoping to find a play in the dirt free card somewhere on top of that pile, it ain't happening. Reggie looked up, and his face was still hopeful. Gee, Mr. McQuinty, that sure is a great-looking pile of dirt you have there. I nodded, keeping my face neutral as I tried not to smile. Sure is, and it's for filling in gopher holes, so I'll likely need all of it. If there's any left, though, I'll be sure to let you kids know so you can trample it flat for me. They rode off down the road, sitting a little higher on their bikes as they realized they might still get to play in it. I shook my head as I watched them leave. I'd never known anyone to get so excited about a pile of dirt, except maybe for a bunch of kids. Something about all that fresh, powdery dirt just made them go a little bit crazy. As I looked at the 6-foot mound of fine white dirt, I almost felt like jumping on it myself. I went inside to finish my preparations, getting my work clothes on and finding my gloves. I sat in the living room pulling my boots on when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I glanced up, the afternoon shadows just starting to lengthen, and saw a pair of small figures standing beside the road. I paused in mid-tie, looking up to see two small forms looking at the pile of dirt. It looked to be a couple of neighborhood kids, maybe having one last look before getting back to their game. I shook my head. Kids were so predictable. I finished tying my boots and stepped out onto the front porch. Hey, looking's fine, but I don't want to see anyone in my... The road was empty. I looked up and down the road. The kids were already playing a game of touch football further down the cul-de-sac. And I picked up my shovel as I thought about how strange that had been. Those two must have really been booking it to make it back to their playmates so quickly. As I started scooping dirt, I thought longingly about having that kind of energy. It would certainly make this job a lot easier. I spent the rest of the afternoon filling in gopher holes. It had been a particularly bad season for them, and the dirt was a band-aid solution at best. The gophers would continue to dig up my yard until I invested in a dog or something. I kept slinging dirt until the sun grew low in the sky, one angry Chuck actually coming up to growl at me before I threw a shovelful of dirt in his face. When it became too dark to see, I thrust my shovel into the pile of dirt and shook the remaining dirt off myself. The kids were finishing up their football game, heading home as the streetlights came on. They all looked longingly at the pile of dirt, but they knew better than to make a play for it while I was standing on the front porch. My cigarette winked on and off as I stood watching the sun go down, and I pitched the end into the dirt as I went inside. I was frying up some hamburgers when I heard the first tremors of laughter from my front yard. Over the sound of popping grease, I could hear the scuttling laughter of children as they played out front. I walked over to the living room window and looked out into the front yard. By the streetlight's ghostly light, I could see them playing on the mound of dirt I had out front. There were two of them, both dressed in dirty jeans and colorful shirts, both having a ball as they capered on my pile of dirt. I was out the door in a matter of seconds, yelling before the door had fully opened. Hey, just what the hell do you think you're doing? Can't you read? Stay off the... The streetlights were dim, but even I could see the absence of anybody in my yard. I walked over to the pile, looking around to see if someone was hiding behind it. I saw pretty quickly that wasn't going to be the case. The pile of dirt was hardly 3 feet tall, and a kid would have to get pretty low to hide behind it. I glanced up and down the street, but the only thing moving on the road was an old chip bag pushed by the wind. I looked back at the pile and was shocked to find that I didn't even see any footprints. The wide, low dirt pile still looked fairly pristine, other than my shovel marks, of course. I scratched my head and went back inside. Maybe I'd just been working too hard today. I pulled my fries out of the oven just as they started to burn. I made 2 hamburgers and added them to the pile of french fries. I tipped a beer into a chilled glass and brought both to the table. After shoveling dirt all afternoon, I was tired and ready for a bite. As I lifted the first one from the plate, I heard my stomach grumble as the grease oozed off the meat. I had just taken the first bite when I heard the metal clang of my shovel falling over. I looked up to find those kids playing on my dirt again. I came barreling out the door, my dinner cooling on my plate, as I stormed out to send these kids off. I was becoming frustrated. I'd made it pretty clear that I didn't want people on my pile of dirt. I had been pretty nice about it, posting signs and asking the kids not to mess with it, but it appeared that some of these kids weren't getting it. If I needed to be a bastard to keep these kids off my dirt, I suppose I'd have to be a bastard. I'd barely gotten 2 words out of my mouth, though, before I once again noticed the yard was empty. I was really getting tired of this. I know what I saw, and what I saw was a pair of filthy kids on my pile of dirt. No matter how many times I checked the yard, though, there was never any sign of a trespasser. The strangest part was a distinct lack of footprints, though. The sand was fresh, maybe even a little damp when you got past the top layer. The kids had been jumping on the sand like a trampoline. There should have been footprints, handprints, something. They came back 3 more times that night, but the last is the only one that really stands out. That was the worst of their appearances. They appeared again as I was finishing my dishes, and again as I sat watching TV. I came striding out to holler at them both times, but all I found was an empty yard. This was ridiculous. What the hell was going on here? I know what I saw, but they were always gone the instant I came outside. Nobody could move that fast, especially not a couple of dirty little kids. And what the hell were they doing out after dark? Most of the parents on this block didn't let their kids out after the streetlights came on. Something funny was going on here. The last time I saw them, that night at least, was just before bedtime. I'd thought the pranks were over as time slipped on. It was 11 o'clock, and I was walking through the living room to get something to help me sleep. I was still a little on edge, and I thought that a nightcap might help me calm down a bit. I was coming out of the kitchen with a tumbler of whiskey, the curtains still open on the front yard, when I saw them there. My glass slipped out of my hand as the 2 kids stood crouching on top of my dirt pile. I was speechless for a moment as the angry fire built inside me. I was furious. Who the hell did these kids think they were? They were coming up in the middle of the night, trying to mess with me. But why? I'd made a very simple request. Why were these kids tormenting me? Because I wouldn't let them play on my damn dirt pile? If I had stopped to quell my anger, I might have noticed that something wasn't right with these 2. The night air was cool on my bare chest as I came shambling out of my house like an angry bull. Who the hell do you think you are? It's almost midnight. Get your asses over here right now. I'm gonna call your parents and let them know what you've been up to. I got a good mind to... They hadn't moved this time, though. They just stood on that mound of dirt like 2 scrawny scarecrows, glowering at me through the dirt caked over their face. My God, had they been eating the dirt or something? I had thought them filthy, but these kids were downright grimy. They didn't seem at all concerned with me, but I definitely had their full attention. I'd come half into the yard when I saw their eyes. They both seemed to have a nasty case of red eye. They stared at me, their eyes seeming to glow somehow, and I suddenly noticed that they cast no shadow in the dim streetlight. They should have. The dirt pile and my shovel cast a long gantry into the falling streetlight, but these 2 had nothing. I had stopped barely 20 feet from the pair when the larger of the 2 took a step towards me. When his dirty sneakers gritted against the loose earth, the red piping looked faded beneath all that mud, and I saw the earth drop over it like a hand. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but all that came out was wet soil. Sand and mud bubbled out from over his lips, and the dirt that had covered his foot had begun to slide up his leg as well. He fell to his knees, clutching his throat as he coughed up leaves and mud as well. The sand slid over his hands and up his arms. Even as the dirt bound the first boy to the pile by his knees, they both struggled, trying to free themselves from the prison of sand, but their efforts were ultimately in vain. The sand reclaimed them both in a sudden whoosh. In a blink, they were both gone again. I walked backwards, never taking my eyes off that pile, until the door was closed between us. The next day, I set to work early. I wanted that pile of dirt out of my yard before nightfall. I worked diligently, filling in holes and putting dirt to good use.
I used it to fill in a few of the potholes in front of my house even. I just wanted as much of it gone as I could manage. I no longer cared how it happened. When the kids came by on their bikes, I told them to leave. They seemed disappointed, but I didn't want them anywhere near that dirt pile. I was filling in an exceptionally large gopher hole when something caught my eye. I had nearly turned back to the pile when something pale and long made me take a second look. At first I thought it was a worm, but the more I looked, the more I thought I knew what it was. I bent down, the shovel hitting the ground woodenly, as I reached down to pick up what I hoped was a bleached piece of wood. It wasn't, though. It was cold, malleable if not unmovable, and crooked like a sea of pale, purpling flesh. The perfectly filthy nail was hardly visible at the tip of the small finger. I went back to the pile and saw the rest of the hand poking out from the bottom, minus the finger I had accidentally amputated. The cops came when I called, and they brought dogs with them, as well as the big white forensics van. They excavated the bodies of a 10-year-old boy from the bottom of the dirt pile, his face frozen in a look of terrified disbelief. He was dressed in very dirty, if not very familiar clothes, and his sneakers had that same filthy red piping that I'd seen the night before. When they lifted him free, they found that his hand was intertwined with something else that also came loose. The other boy had been about 8, and the two had died hand in hand, it seemed. The police had wanted to arrest me, or at least bring me in for questioning, but the forensics guys had figured out pretty quick that these kids had been dead for the last month. A quick search determined that they had been on the missing persons roster for about 3 weeks, and their parents had feared they'd been abducted by some pervert. They'd been playing near the sand pits before they'd gone missing, and the coroner would later find dirt and mud in their lungs and mouth. He figured they had been climbing the big sand piles out there, piles just waiting to be scooped into a truck and sold as fill dirt, when one of them had been sucked down by a pocket of air or an empty spot in the pile. His brother had tried to help him and ended up getting pulled down as well. The two had suffocated as they tried to get out and been picked up by the fill dirt as they trucked it to the company I had bought it from. It happens sometimes, the coroner had told me when I'd asked about it a few weeks later. Kids never think about that kind of thing. They just see a big pile of dirt and start climbing. I haven't seen the two since they took the bodies away, and the company I bought it from came and got the rest of it before they gave me a full refund. I hope they find peace wherever they are now. I think, from now on, I'll just hire someone to fill the holes in my yard. I don't ever want to see another pile of dirt for as long as I live.
I remember it like it was yesterday. My mom was at work, and my brother Daryl was watching me. Daryl was older than me, about 6 years, and he was kind of a jerk. Our dad had left right after I was born, and Mom had to work 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed and keep the lights on and the roof over our heads. Maybe Daryl blamed me for Dad leaving, and that's why he was usually so mean to me. He was never violent, though I got the feeling he wanted to be sometimes. But he always teased me. He told me there were monsters in the basement who would eat me, and told me there were ghosts in the attic, that the boogeyman would come and carry me off some night, about all the perverts who would just scoop me up off the street someday and do stuff I didn't really understand at the time. He liked to scare me, and I think that's how we got on the subject of the Corn Man. It happened one afternoon when we were playing hide and seek. Daryl rarely played with me, not unless Mom made him, and he was being slow about counting, just trying to wait for Mom to go to work so we could go back inside and keep watching TV like he wanted to. He was counting, and I was hiding out in the cornfield where I knew he wouldn't find me. As he finished, he stepped out into the field, knowing that's where I was. He started looking, cursing, and stomping around as he couldn't find me, and seemed to be getting pretty frustrated. Finally, he said the words I will never forget. "Better come out, turd, before the Corn Man gets ya." I stood up. He had been pretty close to finding me, and asking who the Corn Man was. Daryl smiled wickedly, seeing another opportunity to scare me, and get himself back inside as well. The Corn Man, he told me, lived in the cornfields that seemed to perpetually surround our house. The field was filled with corn during this time of year, and Daryl said that the Corn Man patrolled it and got little kids who went out to play in the field. He said that the Corn Man couldn't see you if you stayed still. If you just Stood like a statue, not moving an inch. He wouldn't see you, and he'd think you were just another stalk of corn. I told him not to lie, but he said it was true, and said we should get back inside before the corn man caught us in the field. We were both in the living room, Daryl gripping the remote and flipping through the channels, as Mom said goodbye and left for the night. He had spent that week tormenting me with stories about the corn man that were usually just ways for him to get out of stuff. Corn man will come into your house if he smells garbage. Better take it out before he smells it. I heard corn man comes to take away messy kids. You better clean up around here. Oh, you're going to tell Mom, huh? Well, the corn man loves to eat little tattletales, so go ahead and tell Mom you saw me smoking. I hope I'm awake when he comes to get you. That night, however, he just grinned as someone knocked on the door. He told me to go get it, and I prickled a little. I didn't want to go out after dark. Not after what he had told me about the corn man mainly hunting at night, and usually for kids who were out past curfew. He pushed me with his boot as I dithered, and I stumbled to the door as someone pounded on it again. My hands shook as I reached out, turning the knob slowly as I pulled it open. I sighed happily, though, happy to see Reggie and Clyde for the first time in my life. Reggie and Clyde had been Daryl's friends since elementary school. Mark was usually with them as well, but I supposed he must be off doing something else. They were often involved in Daryl's shenanigans, and I kinda hated seeing them come around. Tonight, though, I was just glad they weren't the corn man. I turned to tell Daryl that his friends were here, but he was already heading for the door, pulling on his leather jacket. He told me he was going out, and I asked where he was going after dark. Not that it's any of your business, but we're going to go summon the corn man so he'll give us a wish. I felt my mouth slip open and asked why he would do that. Well, in the story, if you can complete his challenge, then he grants you a wish. But, he said, turning back towards the door, you'd better stay here. You'd probably be too scared to come out into the cornfield after dark. I agreed with him until I realized that meant I'd be home alone. All night, but by myself. I had grabbed my coat and ran after the three of them before I could think better of it. The three of them were standing by the cornfield, cigarettes winking on and off as I approached. Clyde elbowed Daryl and pointed at me. Daryl grinned the widest I'd ever seen him grin, and the effect was pretty terrifying. He looked like a ghoul from a zombie movie in the cigarette light. Maybe even one of those pedophiles he was always telling me would get me. Well, 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 look who decided to join us. You trying to get a wish too, turd? No, I said, snuffling a little in a mixture of fear and mucus. I just didn't want to be at home alone. What are you talking about? You never said you got wishes from the corn man. Daryl took a long drag off his smoke, the light making his face look like a jack-o'-lantern. Well, the word is that if you stand in the field and say the magic words, the corn man will come and test you. If you can stand as still as a cornstalk, not moving and not being caught, he'll grant you one wish. But if he catches you, your blood will water his cornfield. So, sound like something you want to do, turd? I shook my head nervously, the wind rustling the corn and making me shudder. I didn't want to go out there, but I didn't want to stay here in the dark alone either. He snorted at me and rolled his eyes, pitching his cigarette away from the dry cornfield. Well then, go home if you're going to be a baby. The rest of us will get our wishes, and you'll just be home, pissing your pants. I shook my head again, and he must have taken it for acquiescence. Then come on, or don't. I don't really care. They set off into the thick cornfield, and I followed after them. The sea of stalks whipped past me as the three bigger boys walked in front of me. It was dark, the night birds and the sound of animals tuning up all around us. I was shivering, and it had nothing to do with the night or the chill in the air. I was scared, terrified even, and the jostling boys laughed and whispered to each other as they walked towards the center of the vast cornfield. When the corn surrounded us, we stopped, and Daryl turned to look at us. Okay, so now we chant the special chant to summon him. They stood in a triangle, looking at me, and I moved up to make it a diamond. Corn man, come to me if you can. Corn man, I can stand as the cornstalks can. Corn man, still as stone, not like a man. "Corn man, still and quiet as the corn stalks can." He looked at us as he finished and told us to chant with him. As we raised our voices to the sky, I began to slur my words as my teeth chattered. I was terrified, standing in the cornfield that had been the setting of so many nightmares, and listening as we summoned the creature that had stalked me through those hated fields. Why had I come with them? Would I really have been less safe at home? Wouldn't I have been fine as long as I stayed inside? I heard my brother's words as he told me about how the corn man came after kids who were alone. They drifted through my mind as I felt myself start to cry. I chanted the words to summon the corn man along with the rest of them, tears streaming down my face as the fear took hold. When we heard the rustling, Daryl told us to be quiet. "All right, stand still so he can't see you. If you move, he'll catch you, and then you'll be dead." All four of us stood as still as we could, the corn rustling as something came towards our location. I hoped that maybe it was the farmer that owned the land. He was a nice guy, but he didn't like people playing in his cornfield after dark. If not him, then I hoped it was some of the teenagers he usually kicked out of the field. Let it be anyone but the shadowy monster that was the corn man. He was like a scarecrow with corn stalks for hands and a mouthful of black teeth in my dreams. He would grow very high on his cornstalk legs, and he was faster than anything ever, even Jason or Michael Myers. As we stood in the field like idiots, I saw the sack head of a scarecrow come through the stalks and had to stifle a scream. He was wearing overalls and a straw hat, his face a sack with grease paint, and he was lumbering up out of the corn shakily. He had normal hands, but one of them was holding a scythe and the other was holding a hatchet. As he came stomping out of the corn, I held as still as possible, not moving a single muscle. He was real. He was actually real. In my mind, I had believed in him. Of course I had, but I had hoped that he wasn't really real. It's hard to explain, but some rational part of my mind knew that it was all just a goof my brother had come up with to scare me. Now I was forced to cower as we watched this terror hunt through the field for us. He moved like a wraith, silent and sure, except for the crunch of old corn husks. He smacked at the stalks with his scythe sometimes, and I had to stop my teeth from chattering as he turned to finally look at my hiding place. Until then, he had lumbered around like one of those adults that's only pretending to look for you. I felt like he knew where we were. He was choosing not to find us, and now the game was up. I moved my eyes around, not daring to turn my head, but I couldn't see my brother or his friends anywhere. Had they made a break for it? This was their idea, after all. Why would they run? Had the corn man gotten them? No, I would have heard that. They had abandoned me. Daryl had finally gotten tired of having me around and decided to have the corn man do his dirty work for him. Mom and the police would search for me, but they'd never find my body. I would water the corn forever. As my eyes rolled around looking for them, the sack head turned towards me, and the creature started stalking in my direction. I was speechless, utterly terrified, and as I stood like a statue, I felt a warm stream of urine run down my leg as the cloth hood came within inches of my face. I could hear his raspy breath beneath it, smell the air as he stared down, and I found myself wishing he would just get it over with already. We stared at each other for a count of 20 before the corn man blew out a raspberry of barely contained laughter and let his weapons drop to the ground. "Are you kidding me? Daryl, your brother pissed his pants!" All three of them came out of the tall cornfield then, laughing like donkeys. The mask came off to reveal Mark's stupid, sweaty face as he guffawed at me. They surrounded me like a pack of jackals, and all pointed to the piss stain on my pants and the liquid running down into the dirt. I felt the tears falling again, but my body was still locked in a rictus of terror. Daryl had tricked me. He'd tricked me again. He had terrified me and humiliated me, and now I would have to walk back home with cold, wet pants as my brother and his friends laughed at me. I wanted to run away, but my legs weren't quite ready to spirit me away just yet. That's probably the only reason I'm still alive. I saw Mark jerk suddenly, the smile dribbling off his face as something squelched from his stomach. It spattered across my brother and his friends, though they noticed it too late. I, however, couldn't help but miss it as it pattered across my face and chest. It was blood, thick and red, and they turned as a horror strode from the field of lush cornstalks. My mind hadn't done him justice. The corn man, or whatever he was, looked more like a terrible husk doll that you sometimes see at the farmer's market when Mom took us. It appeared to be woven together from corn husks and corn stalks and the silk tops of the plants. It was dirt and leaves and corn cobs and live plants. Its entire body seemed to move like a living vine. It moved with a complete form, its entire being, and it waded into Darrell and his friends like a force of nature. Clyde had turned to look at what had wetted him, and I saw that twisted gnarl of root and corn stalks slam into the side of his head. His neck audibly broke, bones poking out from his collar as he fell sideways into the corn. Darrell screamed, Kyle cursed loudly, and I stood rooted in fear as the corn man went about his work. "No way!" Darrell yelled, stepping back as he turned to face the creature. "No friggin' way!" "It's real?" Kyle asked. The creature momentarily stalled as it looked at them speculatively. No, I made it up. I made the whole thing up. It can't be real. It can't be real. It can't be." He died with that negation on his lips. The corn man extended his thick, rooted arm, and it grew as it coursed towards Darrell's head. Darrell's screams were cut off as the root covered his face, his throat bulging as it poured its roots and stalks down his throat. I could see his body twitching, his limbs convulsing as the corn man pumped his roots into him. My cheeks were wet again, my terror-fueled tears streaming down my face as Kyle made a run for it. He disappeared into the corn, just in time to miss the fate of his friend. Darrell's body erupted in a spray of corn stalks as they burst from him in a red spray of arterial blood. He crumpled, very dead, as his form was shredded. He lay in pieces, his body watering the corn just as he had said. I was resprayed with blood, this time being washed in the deluge, but I was still frozen with fear. My body had hit that point where it was numb, too scared to move, and as the corn man stalked in, I could hear my ragged breathing intensifying. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak. I just knew that this was the time when my own blood would water the cornfields, just like Darrell's. He stood face to face with me, much like Mark had when he was pretending, and as the seconds spread out, I felt like my heart must surely stop, and I would die of fear. Then, to my amazement, the corn man spoke. "You have passed my test. You truly can do as the cornstalks can, and have earned a boon of me. What do you desire of the corn man?" I was speechless, my body unmoving, as I continued to stand like a statue before this hulking horror. His voice sounded like the whispering of wind through the corn stalks, and if I hadn't been frozen in fear, I would have shuddered out of my skin as his words hit me. He loomed over me, his body bathed in the blood of my brother and his friends, and I was left to shudder and shake as he stared at me. He cocked his head, his roots making a strange creaking noise as he studied me in my fear. Come now, there must be something you desire. Why else would you brave your death at the hands of the corn man, if not for a boon?" I looked up at him. Even hunkered down, he was taller than me, and my eyes streamed with tears, my body unable to move. "Very well. Know then that the corn man owes thee a boon, a favor as your people say, and he will be back to collect in time. Think well over your wishes, that my debt may be paid." Then he lumbered off after Kyle, his steps groaning as he moved, and I was left standing amidst the stalks. That's where they found me the next day. That's where they found me, and what was left of Darrell, Mark, and Clyde.
I was catatonic for days. I had remained still as a stone in the field all night, not daring to move as the fear held sway over me. Even when they called out to me, I couldn't answer them. My legs ached. My body cried out for rest, but my legs refused to unlock. My mother's arms were warm as they wrapped around me. I was cold, hungry, my throat like a desert, but I couldn't move or speak. They kept me in the hospital for weeks, trying to figure out what had happened to me. The police questioned me ceaselessly, being covered in my brother's blood like I was, but my mother ended every interview by telling them that it was pointless to question me. They assumed that I had watched the 4 boys being murdered, Kyle's remains found further out in the field, and I had been traumatized by the events. I stayed like that for almost 3 weeks, before waking up one day to find my arms and legs were ready to obey me again. The police came back to question me, but I told them that I had blacked the whole thing out, not wanting to ever speak of the horrible things that had happened in that field. I only tell you here, a decade later, to come to terms with what happened to me and try to put it behind me. That, and see if anyone else knows of the Corn Man and his ways. You see, he's come back over the years to collect on his favor. I still live with my mother, my body locking up sometimes when the fear takes over. Once a year, on the anniversary of my brother's death, he comes to ask if I'm ready to take his boon. Sometimes he appears in my room at night, sometimes outside my window, but he always speaks in that strange voice and asks if I'm ready to accept my favor. Every time I remain still, my body seizing up and my jaw locking. And every time, he goes away. I've gotten better at getting myself under control again. Last time I was only frozen for an hour, but I've had to go back to the hospital over the years when the catatonia reemerges. One day, I will be able to ask for something, so I never have to see him again. Until then, I suppose I'll be haunted by the visage of the Corn Man. The storm was one of epic proportions. It closed the schools for 3 weeks, right up until Christmas break. 4 days before Christmas, that was when I met her. Better not stay out too late or Soap Sally'll get ya. Mom called this after me, right as I went out the door to go play with Rob and Terrell. I rolled my eyes, slipping on my mittens as I grabbed my sled from behind the door. Sure, Mom, I'll be sure to watch out for Soap Sally. That was always what my mom told me. Her little attempt to scare me when I was a kid, I think. When I was younger, 4 or 5 maybe, Mom would use it to make sure I was inside before the street lights came on. I remember the first time she ever said it to me, the moment ingrained in my brain forever. I was heading out to play in the sandbox in the front yard, something Dad had spent all day building on his day off, and she had offhandedly told me to make sure I was in before the street lights came on, or Soap Sally would take me away. I had stopped, little pail and shovel in my hand, and asked her who Soap Sally was. My mother just shrugged and said it was something her mother had always said, and the two of us had used it as our kind of personal joke from then on. Better get the groceries in before dark, Mom would say. Soap Sally might get you. Better hurry up and take the trash out, Mom would say. I think I hear Soap Sally prowling around. We'd done it for so long, it was just kind of normal. But I wasn't a baby anymore. I was 12, and I knew Soap Sally was just a boogeyman that adults used to scare kids. She was no more real than the Wampus Cat, another of my mother's colorful stories, and I put it out of my mind as I ran to join the others. Terrell had told us that his brother had told him about a big hill near Basker's Pond. It's so steep that when you come down it, you almost fly, he said. So I trudged through the fresh powder, over the streets that no longer looked like streets at all, and made my way towards the edge of town. My hometown isn't very big, one of those 2 stoplights and a gas station kind of places you always drive through on your way somewhere else. There were maybe 20 kids my age in town, and our whole school could have probably fit in your graduating class. We knew we were living in a podunk town in the Georgia hills, and most of us dreamed about getting out after high school and doing anything but staying here. For some of us, that dream was actually realized. For others, the cemetery was all we had to look forward to. I met Terrell near Basker's Field, a small little picnic area that butted up against Basker's Pond. The pond wasn't huge, but it was a great place to swim and fish in the summertime, and just, kind of enjoy yourself. Today, however, it was a winter wonderland of fresh snow and chilling wind.
Terrell was bundled up to the eyebrows in a thick ski jacket, and his snow pants had little rolls in them that made him look a little like the Michelin Man. He, too, was clutching a battered old sled, and when he spoke, I could see the air puffing from his mouth, even under his hood. "About time. Where's Rob?" That was when we heard a loud yell from up the road, and Rob came running with a banana yellow disc under his arm. He was wearing a matching ski suit and a pair of thick snow boots that seemed to be the only thing he wore that wasn't yellow. His voice cut through the sound of the wind like a foghorn, and I wondered if we were the only people in town not inside right now. It was a little spooky, even in the middle of the day. "Took you long enough," Terrell said. "Are you ready to sled?" "If this hill is half as cool as you say it is, T, then I'm ready to sled till midnight," Rob said excitedly. With that, we set off. We had all seen the hill in question. Overlook Crest was the place to spread your blanket on the 4th of July to watch the fireworks, or to picnic on, or to just sit and watch the boats as they went out there fishing during the warm months. It offered a great view of the water, and as we trudged up it, the hill felt twice as steep as usual. The snow made it slippery, and the three of us were laughing and pushing as we reached the top. Terrell won, of course. Terrell was a beefy kid, and he was harder to push down than Rob, who was mostly skin and bones. He set his sled against the snow, and when he slid down, he really did seem to fly. We spent the day on the hill, sledding, snowball fighting, making snowmen, and generally enjoying the day. Blizzards like these were rare, and we'd been having a lot of days like this where we were just free to be kids and enjoy our childhood. Sometimes we linked up with others from school to have snowball fights or play games, but mostly it was just Terrell and Rob, and me, of course, enjoying the childhood we had before it was over. We had all expected it to end when we went to high school, the dying place of childish things, and not one of us could have guessed that it might be something childish that ended our innocence. I didn't notice it was getting dark until the streetlights came on and sent a dazzle of diamonds up from the snow. "Ah, crap. Mom's going to be mad if I'm late." "Oh, relax," Rob said. "It's not like we have school tomorrow. As long as you're home before bedtime, why would she care?" Rob's parents were never home, leaving him in the care of his aunts or his grandmother since they worked late. Terrell and I, however, had mothers and fathers who would expect us home when the streetlights came on, and I could see Terrell shuffling nervously too. We were all poised at the top of the hill, preparing to race to the bottom, and when Rob saw our looks, he rolled his eyes and jumped. "Last one to the bottom is a baby," he sing-songed. We all jumped then, putting on a burst of speed as we tried to catch him. As we came down, I began to hear a strange noise, the rumble of something rolling down the street, the jingle of an almost merry bell, and the hum of a gravelly voice. I looked around, trying to find the source of the noise, and that's when I saw her walk under a streetlight. It was an old woman, pushing a wheelbarrow or a small cart. We were heading right for her, and Rob was turned around backwards so he could laugh and mug at us. "Rob, look out!" He turned just in time to smack face first into the cart. We swerved to a stop, Terrell and I running down the hill the rest of the way. We could already see the old lady bending over him to inspect the prone boy, and under the glare of the streetlights, he looked pretty bad. There was a big gash on his forehead, the blood leaving red streaks down his yellow ski suit. Rob was groaning when we approached, and the woman looked up at us, smiling feebly as she rose to her full height. She was as wide as she was tall, and she was nearly 6 feet. She wore a voluminous black dress, her hair caught in a scarf or a kerchief that trapped it against her head. Her hands were liver-spotted, her fingers long and spidery as they sank back into her sleeves. The cart she was pushing seemed to be empty, and I figured she was on her way to pick something up when we bumped into her. There was a bell attached to it, and Rob flopped back against it, making it tinkle merrily. "Dear me, I didn't see you there, son. Are you okay?" she said in her thin, spidery voice. We helped Rob to his feet, but he was shaky and hardly able to stand. I was worried that maybe he had a concussion, maybe even a broken skull, and I wanted to help him get to the house as quickly as I could. Terrell asked the woman if we could borrow her cart, but she said she needed it later and couldn't loan it out. "But I'll help you get back to my cottage so you can call for help. I'll make you something warm to drink while you call your parents and let them know what happened. Put him in the cart now. You can help me push him back to my house." I was hesitant. Mom was always clear on not taking rides from strangers, and certainly not going to their house. But Rob groaned and wobbled then, which made up my mind. Our town was so small after all. We may have never seen this lady before, but there was very little chance that she would want to hurt us, right? No one ever wanted to hurt us, and despite all the lessons about stranger danger, we had never even heard of anyone getting kidnapped. We loaded Rob into the wagon, the bell jingling as he slid in, and pushed it back the way we had come. As it turned out, the woman lived in the woods behind Basker's Park. The tires rumbled over the wood chips that led to her house, and Rob groaned as we jostled him in the cart. We had left our sleds behind, and we moved unburdened towards the dark little cabin at the end of the long road. It looked spooky at night, not a candle or a light inside. "You can push him right in the front door," she gravelled out. As we neared, something screamed at me not to go inside that house, though. Common sense seemed to have reasserted itself, and when I paused on the steps to the front porch, the old woman and Terrell barely noticed. As the door came open, I could smell something like wax melting, a warm, aromatic smell of tallow. There were floral smells as well, and something akin to the cooking of bacon fat. There was another smell, though, something that prickled the hairs on the back of my neck. A coppery smell. A wet smell. And when I took a step back, the old woman seemed to notice that I hadn't come inside. She turned in the doorway, and we made eye contact for a few seconds, before she asked why I wasn't coming in. I just remembered that I thought of something, anything, and landed on a flimsy lie. "My dad, he's coming to pick us up, and if he gets there and we're gone, he'll be worried. I probably need to..." I turned to go back down the cedar path, but suddenly her hand was around my wrist. I felt my breath catch as I looked down at those long, spidery fingers. The bones creaked beneath her skin, and the flesh around them was so thin that I imagined I could see them through the pale wrapper. As firm as her grip was, her skin was waxy and slick. It reminded me of nothing so much as candle wax, heated tallow, and when I looked into her face, I could see nothing human there. Her face looked like an exceptionally well-crafted mask, a mask made of human skin. "Come inside," she whispered, and I could see that her mask bore too much makeup. She had really caked it on, and it made her look almost clownish. Whoever had applied it roughly. Her eyes were like black pits beneath all that dark eyeshadow. I whispered, my tongue now dry as it battered against my chapped lips. "I just need to tell my dad where "Your father can't help you now," she breathed, grinning with her mouth full of gravestone teeth. "Don't worry. You'll see him very soon." She yanked my arm then, and I saw my one chance to escape. I pulled back hard, nearly toppling her from the porch, my arms slipping out of her greasy grip. I was running flat out as she cawed angrily behind me. I didn't stop running until I reached my house. My mom was waiting for me on the porch, looking angry as I came running up. She asked what I thought I was doing out so late. She asked if I meant to meet Soap Sally, as she always joked about. She asked me if I intended to freeze to death out in the snow. All those questions went unanswered. All her anger disappeared as I wrapped my arms around her and told her that some old lady had taken Terrell and Rob. She called the police, but seemed angry when she hung up. She told me that they must have thought she was someone pulling a prank. They told her that they would get right on that, and the next time Soap Sally came after her to make sure there was less than a foot of snow on the ground. She sent me to bed, but my dreams were full of the old woman and her deep, pitiless eyes. In my dreams, she got me. In my dreams, she cackled as she peeled my skin. I woke up the next day to hear Mom on the phone with Terrell's mom. "He came home in a state last night. Said some lady had Terrell, just like I told you last night. Didn't you find anything? I'll ask him once he gets up. If he comes home, let me know, please." She hung up the phone and came to talk to me. The police came by later that day to question me. I guess they were taking the disappearance of 2 children a little more seriously now. I told them exactly what I had told my mom. Rob had hit his head, and the old lady had offered to help us. We put him in the cart and pushed him to her house. I got spooked and tried to run, but she grabbed me. I got free and ran to the house. I told my mom what had happened, and she called the police, but they didn't believe her. It seemed like they were interested in this house now and asked me to take them there. I gave them directions, but I refused to go anywhere near that place. They came back later and told me that the house appeared to have been abandoned for years and asked me if I was sure. I told them I was, and they said all they had found was a bit of dried blood and a black dress that might fit a horse. They didn't believe me, that much was apparent, but they believed me after the soap arrived. I woke up one morning about a week after Rob and Terrell disappeared and walked downstairs to the smell of breakfast. Mom was making flapjacks and bacon, and the smell turned my stomach a little as the familiar odors assaulted my nose. To this day, the smell of hot fat makes me want to puke, and the smell of it always takes me back to that house and that day. "Sweetie, could you bring the milk in off the front porch?" I looked outside. "Snow's 3 feet deep, Mom. I doubt the milkman ran today." "Well, I heard someone on the porch a few minutes ago. They left something and didn't knock. See if it's the milk before it freezes, please." Sitting on the mat was a small wicker basket. Sitting on a bed of black cloth were square packages wrapped in wax paper. I felt my breath hitch as I saw the cloth, but tried to shake it off. What didn't remind me of the old woman in the woods these days? I reached down to pick up the package and felt the semi-solid brick of soap as it smooshed a little between my fingers. I unwrapped it, not sure who would leave soap on the doorstep, and that's when I saw the note. It was under the soap, written in a long, spidery hand, and the words sent a shudder through me that the winter chill couldn't top. "See you soon." I felt the soap slip from my numb fingers. When it hit the boards, I looked down and saw something that pushed a scream up my throat. It was a bone. A finger bone. The police told my dad that it was Rob's finger bone, but they found trace evidence of Terrell's bones in the other bar of soap. Both their parents had received similar baskets of soap, and, unfortunately, Rob's grandmother had brought it out of the bathroom when the police came to check. She had been washing her hands with it all day, having no clue that she was washing her hands with her grandson's body. My own grandmother came to visit a few days later. She and Mom had a long talk about something, and I got the feeling that Mom didn't want her to tell me something. As she shuffled to my room, I couldn't help but shudder as I imagined my door opening to reveal a huge woman in a black dress and a shawl leering at me as she smiled with her witch's grin. When Grandma knocked, I told her to come in. She sat down on the bed and seemed to think about what she meant to say. "I grew up in this town too, you know that. One night my friend Grace and I were late coming home from a church dance. We cut through the park, and as we passed by the sign that said, 'Welcome to Basker's Park,' we saw an old woman who was trying to fix her cart. She asked us to help her get the cart to her house, and we obliged. No sooner had I seen her house, though, than I got a tickling feeling. My mother had told me about Soap Sally, too, and I suddenly realized what the smell was around that cart. It was tallow and lye and blood. I ran as quick as I could, and I never saw my friend again. You got real lucky, kiddo, but don't press your luck by being careless," she said, giving me a little hug as her bones creaked in that way that Soap Sally's had. She left me then, and we never spoke about it again. That was 5 years ago. 5 long winters ago. The snow is back, and the days are short, but I haven't left my house after dark, not since that night I lost my best friends. Though I never saw her again, I know she has seen me. Sometimes I hear the grumble of that cart, the tinkle of the bell, and it sends me running home as surely as it did the night I escaped her. My greatest fear is that she will make good on her threat one day. One day, Soap Sally may leave me on my parents' front porch, their missing son unknowingly come home. When I was 8, I was abducted for about an hour. I know that's an odd statement, but trust me when I say, it gets weirder. When I was 8, a man abducted me right off the street. My parents and I lived in a shabby apartment about a block from my primary school. Since Mom worked days and Dad worked nights, I was responsible for getting myself to and from school since I was 6. I walked the same way home every day, and if someone was trying to snatch me, it wouldn't have been hard to learn my routine. So there I was, walking to school with my Power Rangers book bag swinging off my shoulder, thinking of nothing more pressing than the math test I hadn't studied for the night before. Suddenly, a white van rolled close enough to ruffle my hair with the side mirror of the van. Then a hand caught the handle at the top of my book bag and pulled me in. I struggled as the meaty hand lifted me into the passenger seat, but he pulled me up with little effort. He reached over and shut the door, his arm crossing right in front of my face. This would have been my opportunity to bite or kick or fight in some way before the van rolled on again. I found myself unable to react, though, frozen by the ease at which I had been lifted from the street. As we moved away from the curb, I glanced at my abductor as he sat behind the wheel. It's funny how your mind always creates a picture of a potential abductor. When the teacher talks about the strangers in school, I always picture a man in a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat that covers his face, a soft voice with a gentle nature. On all the TV shows I wasn't allowed to watch but did, child molesters were always these casual business types with vans full of candy and sweet smiles. This guy, however, looked nothing like the guys on TV. The man sitting next to me was large, gray, and scary looking. He looked more like the prisoners on the TV shows I watched when no one was paying attention. He had long, greasy hair that was graying in odd places, muscular arms connected to a barrel chest barely contained by his dirty sweater, and a pair of eyes that looked 1,000 miles away as he piloted the van on its course. I became terrified that I would never see my parents again, that I would never see my toys again, and that my parents wouldn't have anything to remember me by except the school picture I'd brought home last week. It's funny sometimes, the things kids worry about. "Don't worry, Mark. I'm not gonna hurt you," the guy said in a gravelly voice full of mucus. I stiffened in my seat. How do you know my name?" That was a stupid question. The man had probably been stalking me for weeks before making his move. He knew my name, he knew my parents' names, he knew my address, he knew the kids I played with at recess, and what time I took my first poop every morning. He had stalked me like a hunter stalks a deer, and now it was time to move in for the kill. "Because I am you." That took me by surprise. I had expected many things. I had thought maybe he'd say he was in love with me, to scream at me that he would kill me, so I'd be scared so he could get off on my fear. Maybe even that he would keep me forever, that he'd be my new dad, or I'd be his new son. I hadn't expected him to say that he was me. "What do you mean?" I asked, visibly confused. He stared straight ahead, seemingly unable to begin. I thought again about how he was probably going to hurt me and leave me in the woods somewhere after he'd killed me. That was what the killers always did on unsolved mysteries after they killed someone. I bet he had a shovel or something in the back. My 8-year-old mind could already see him carrying my limp body off into the forest to bury me in an unmarked grave. The dogs would come sniffing after me at some point, and they'd unearth a perfect little skeleton in a hole in the woods. My parents would cry and scream, just like the parents did on TV, and Robert Stack would ask the viewers to call if they had any information. It's funny, the places a kid's mind goes when he's in panic. "This is hard, kid. Now that I'm here, I don't know how to start." We sat in silence for a few more minutes before he found his words. "So, in 40 years, humanity cracks the secret to time travel." He paused again, unsure how to continue, before finally settling into a rhythm. "By the time they do, you will have spent 20 years of your mandatory 2 life sentences in prison." I turned to look at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. "Prison? Why am I in prison?" He sighed, fishing a cigarette out of the cup holder, where he had several sitting loose. He pressed the lighter on the dashboard and put the cigarette in his mouth as he waited for it to pop again. "We've done some things we aren't proud of, Mark. We acted in haste, and now we have to contemplate at leisure. Let's just say that you took the easy way out one too many times, and finally, it came back to bite you. The old neighborhood claims us all eventually, Mark. You're living in a septic tank, and it's only a matter of time before you get pulled down into the shit." The lighter popped, making me jump, and he yanked it out and pressed the tip to the cigarette. He inhaled and turned back to look at me. "We don't have much time. Someone noticed me take you off the street. At least they did last time. And the cops are going to pull me over in about 10 minutes. You have to stop this from happening. You can't let the old neighborhood claim you like it always does. There are bad people there, people that will be responsible for your downfall. You have to get as far away from them as you can. You have to get away and never look back. If you stay, you'll be forever damned. Get out, Mark! Get out and live!" The cigarette jittered in his lips. He was shaking me then, yelling into my face,
shaking me as the cigarette's red end swam back and forth in his mouth. I felt my head getting fuzzy as he shook me, and when the red light started flashing, I thought it might be from all the shaking. He stopped then, turning to look back at the lights, and reached into his pocket to pull out a gleaming piece of steel. It was a gun, a big gun, and when he stepped out of the car and leveled it at the policeman, they seemed afraid. They weren't afraid when they shot him, though. They yelled at me when I climbed out of the driver's door, but I didn't care. I held his hand as he lay dying, his face turning to look at me. I could see that half his cheek was missing. His sweater was turning the color of autumn leaves, and when he spoke, it was gurgly and wet. He coughed a bright spray of blood onto my shirt, and I still remember how it stood out against the bright yellow as the cops came running towards me. "Get out, Mark. Get out before it's too..." By the time they got there, he was dead. My parents arrived shortly after I got to the police station. Mom hugged me, crying, and Dad wrapped himself clumsily around me as well. It was the first time in months that I could remember seeing them together. As they folded me into their embrace, I remember thinking that everything was going to be okay. I could avoid the scary man's prophecy and prevent the terrible fate that he was trying to warn me about. How naive I was then. That night, Mom and Dad had a terrible fight. Mom wanted to leave the neighborhood. She wanted us to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while, until we could find a different place. She didn't feel safe here, not in a place where people just got picked up off the street and nearly kidnapped in broad daylight. Dad wouldn't hear of it. He had lived here his whole life. This was where his work was. She was crazy. Maybe she could just get another job somewhere, but he wasn't about to throw away 10 years on the job because she was scared. As I lay in bed, I realized that everything wasn't just going to be okay. I clutched my stuffed Ninja Turtle tightly as they continued to rage at each other in the living room. The next day, Mom came to talk to me. It was decided that Mom and I would stay with my grandparents for a while. It was also decided that Dad would stay at the apartment. A little while turned into the next 10 years of my life. My parents got divorced a year after we went to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. I went to see him a few times, but Mom usually insisted that he come to us. When I did go to see him, she came with me. She still didn't trust the old neighborhood, and the few times I went back, I saw that it had gotten worse. Gangs and drugs had taken over, and Dad had become a stranger to me. When the construction company he had been with for so long closed down, he joined the element around him. Mom wouldn't tell me what he was doing, but I'm sure he was making drugs. The next time I saw him, he looked like a zombie from a horror movie. His hair was thinning, his face was gaunt, and he smelled like a truck stop toilet. He told me to stay in school and make something of myself. He told me not to end up like him, not to let people I thought were my friends drag me down into something I couldn't get back out of. Whether he knew it or not, he spoke the words that the strange man had said to me when he told me to never come back to our old neighborhood. "It's a trap, son. The only thing it can do is ruin you." When his apartment burned down a few months later, Mom didn't even take me to his funeral. I was 15 by then, just starting high school, and ready for the rest of my life. My grandparents had money, the kind of money that I now understand my mom wanted. They gave both of us the best life they could. With my grandfather's influence, I got into private school after private school. My mother made it very clear that I wasn't to squander the gifts I'd been given, and I took her at her word. By the time I was 18, I was at the top of my class and ready to enter almost any college I wanted. College was where I met Tabitha, though. Tabitha was where everything changed. I enrolled in a prestigious college, but I won't sully their reputation by naming them here. They were proud to name me amongst their alumni when I first stepped into their halls of learning. I took to my classes much the way I had taken to high school classes. I excelled, was noticed, and was praised for my hard work. I made the dean's list and was invited to join the kinds of academic circles that would ensure I had my own level of influence when the time came for my children to attend school. I was as far from that sidewalk in my old neighborhood as I had ever been. Little did I know, I was much closer than I thought. Tabitha was a year above me. She was a film major I'd met through a friend, and I knew I wanted her from the first time I saw her. My friend Jace was not what you would call centered on his studies. Jace had been accepted on a sports scholarship, and I had accepted that he was a burnout who was here to party and meet girls.
Jace thought it was the height of hilarity to get me to skip out on my studies and hang out with him and his other friends, and Tabitha was one such friend. It was she who brought me about to the return of my old life. It all started because Jace was in my room, calling the person he bought drugs from. "Damn it!" he yelled, slamming the phone down and startling me from my work. "He won't sell me anymore," he sulked, drawing his feet to his chest as he sat on my bed. "Says my friends keep calling and coming by, and he thinks we're bringing heat around. Where am I supposed to get my Aether now?" Aether was a drug that was trendy on campus at the time. I knew it was amphetamine-based, but other than that, I had little knowledge of it. I didn't take drugs. I wanted to stay sharp, and other than the knowledge I gained from Jace and his friends, I was pretty ignorant of the whole culture. I was supposed to get some for the party tonight. Now I gotta show up empty-handed. A party, I thought. Maybe Tabitha would be there. I wanted to see her again, but if Jace wasn't invited to any more parties, neither would I. I thought fast and realized that I might not be as ignorant about the culture as I thought. Maybe I did know someone. I know a place you could get some drugs," I said, almost shyly. An hour later, we pulled up in front of my Uncle Randy's house. Uncle Randy was what I had always called Dad's friend Randall for most of my life. He and Dad had been childhood friends. Uncle Randy had been the best man at my parents' wedding, and I kept in touch with him a little after Dad died. His house had once been pretty, too pretty for a bachelor, Mom would often say, but now it looked run down and kind of creepy when we pulled up. Jace looked at me as if to say this was not how he was used to buying drugs, but I climbed out and told him to follow me. Randy was on the front porch, and he looked rough. He had clearly been cooking for quite some time. Burn scars and adult acne spotted his face. His receding hairline had been scooped back until the shiny pate drew attention to the greasy ponytail that hung limply off the back of his head. He looked like every internet troll you'd ever seen memed, but his weaselly eyes were full of dull hate and a bright hunger for whatever he could get from others. He greeted me warmly, but his eyes never smiled. We bought Aether from him, and were gone without much catching up or small talk. Apparently Uncle Randy did not have time for small talk anymore. The party was a huge success. Tabitha was there, and after Jace told them all how I had saved the party, she warmed up to me considerably. I didn't need the Aether that she puffed into my mouth with every passionate kiss. I was high enough off just being that close to her. She spent most of the party with her hand wrapped around mine, her body pressed against me. We were dating after that. I wouldn't use Aether. Just getting a contact high when we kissed was enough for me. She called it Aether hopping, and delighted in pushing the potent smoke into my mouth with every kiss. We started becoming very close. As we spent more and more time together, I tried to juggle my studies with the rush of my new girlfriend. I had always been too consumed by my term papers, or the collegiate essay, to have much time for a companion. With Tabitha, though, I felt happy in her distraction, and full of her presence. Eventually, we graduated from college and moved into our own apartment. She got work as a columnist for a magazine, and I started work as an architect for a firm in the city. The money was good, we were both making enough to do the things we loved, and we found ample time to spend with each other. Tabitha kept her drug use under control, and I had broken myself of what little habit I had. Tabitha was enough for me, and I hoped I was enough for her. I was so naive. We'd been together about a year when she started spiraling. She said that she wrote better when she was on Aether. She certainly wrote more, but probably not better. The magazine she wrote for began to kick the articles back, not pleased with her work. This made her more self-conscious and made her use more. As the money stopped coming in, she still seemed to find ways to get Aether. She never asked me for money, and I could always tell when she was just going day to day, trying to find her fix. In hindsight, I should have realized what was going on. She began to be gone for long periods of time, always coming home tired and irritable. She was aloof and confrontational. When I confronted her about it, she became aggressive and often combative. I never knew what to do in these cases. She was so removed from the Tabitha I had fallen in love with, and I didn't know what to do with her when she became this venom-spitting demon. Afterwards, we always made up. She said how sorry she was, and promised she'd never do it again. Then we repeated the experience a few weeks later. The night she came home with bruises was really when I lost it. We fought, a screaming match like none we'd ever had, and she stormed out of the apartment. I heard her car start up and leave the lot. I just sat in our apartment, wondering what I should do.
What I did in the end was follow her. I had often worried that her drug use might send her spiraling out of control, so I had installed a program on her phone that would let me track its location. I know this sounds invasive, but I was terrified that she might get lost or hurt, and I might need to find her quickly. Aether has some severe health risks, and the thought of her having a heart attack or something, and no one being able to find her, hurt me deeply. I wish now that I had just let her leave. I followed her to the neighborhood. I followed her to Uncle Randy's house. Her car was parked outside. As I walked up, I could already hear a low noise coming from the living room. The lights were off, the living room curtains were drawn, but they were illuminated from behind by the glow of the TV. The door was ajar, one of her purple sneakers left across the threshold. As I pushed the door open, I could hear Tabitha's heady moans and could guess what was going on. Randall was her supplier. When she couldn't pay him, she had settled up in other ways. Now she was in his living room, paying with the only currency she had left. I'd like to say that I flew into a rage, but I didn't. I'd like to say that I blacked out, but I didn't. I remember everything with crystal clarity. I opened the coat closet and took out the shotgun I knew that he had there from childhood. It was loaded, as it always was, and Uncle Randy had kept it as clean and oiled as the day he had shown it to 7-year-old me. He told me it was for bad people that might want to hurt him. He told me it wasn't a toy, and I should never point a gun at anyone I didn't want dead. A lesson that came back to bite him that day. Tabitha screamed when she saw me framed in the living room door. She had been smiling a moment before, but now all the blood had drained from her face. She looked like the corpse she would soon become. Randy turned his head, that greasy tail swinging. He looked at me in surprise, and I leveled the shotgun at the two of them, my face a cold mask of indifference. Tabitha said my name, mouthed it before her perfect chest was a spray of blood, and the buckshot turned it into a pitted landscape of gore and viscera. Randy said nothing. The first shot had opened up the top of his skull, and he died instantly. She lay atop him, tears welling in her eyes as she fought for breath. She fixed me with those eyes as if to say, well, what else was I supposed to do? I didn't have an answer for her. I just dropped the gun on the worn rug and walked out onto the front porch to wait for the cops. I wasn't there when she died. I didn't hold her in my arms and tell her how sorry I was. I just sat on the porch and listened to her gasp out her breaths until they were muffled by the sound of approaching police sirens. I was convicted of a double homicide at the age of 22. I was given 2 life sentences, and I will never see the outside world again. Except, I guess I will. I don't know how old I'll be when the program makes me an offer. The self I met was old, but everyone over 20 is old to an 8-year-old. If I had to guess, I would say he was somewhere in his 40s, but that's just a guess. He told me I would be in prison for 20 years. I guess this is a fact that's set in stone. As I sit in my cell and think about my future, I often think about what he said. Someone saw me take you off the street. At least they did last time. That leads me to believe that he experienced this when he was a child. Maybe I always go back and try to warn myself, and perhaps I always fail. What if my life is nothing but a loop of trying and dying to keep myself from coming to Randy's living room and ruining my life? How long has this loop been going on? What would happen if I closed it? Would I simply cease to exist? I lay on my single bed some nights, staring at the roaches crawling across the ceiling, and think about the people who have brought me to this point. My mother, my father, my grandparents, Jace, Tabitha, Uncle Randy, and I somehow know what must be done as they all swim by. When it's my turn to step into the past, I don't think I'll explain anything. I might just take the gun out of my pocket and shoot myself as I sit rooted in the passenger seat and see what happens next. I've got 20 years to think about it, I guess. Plenty of time to work out the finer points of my own murder. Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thanks so much for joining me for tonight's story. Well, this is our first delve into dark journeys, and I guess you could say we really started with a bang. There's still 29 stories to go, so get comfy and join me on this dark ride. If you enjoy what you saw, and you're not already, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Maybe click the bell so you don't miss a story. I know you wouldn't want to miss another Dr. Plague special. And if you've got the time, maybe interact with this video. I like it when people stop by and say hi. Let's go ahead and thank our patrons before we leave. Thanks to Leslie Lou Riddle and Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributors. Thanks to Xaronan for being our Ghostly Reader contributor, and thanks to Glenn Jenkins for being our Ghostwriter tier contributor. Much, much appreciation, fellas. Couldn't do the show without you. Patrons have been enjoying my videos a day early, so why not join the club? Come on down to Patreon, and for just $5 a month, you too can be part of our Spooky Skeleton tier and get your videos a day early and have your name read out at the end of every TikTok and every YouTube video that I do. If you'd prefer to buy a book, come on down to Amazon. I've got a link below. We have many books. I think there's definitely something that'll fit your interest. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.